Tony Hayward was quoted by Time magazine in the July 25th, 2010 episode or issue by saying that he wanted his life back. If you paid attention to the news back in April of 2010, you will remember that there was a huge, significant event that caused some concern to people living in the United States and the southeastern part of the United States and the Gulf of Mexico. You may not know who Tony Hayward is, but I bet you remember the worst ecological disaster since the Exxon Valdez. Maybe some of you are too young to remember the Exxon Valdez, but I bet you have parents or grandparents speaking to you or spoke to you about a crude oil tanker that spilled over 500,000 barrels of oil into the waters off the coast of Alaska near Prince William Sound. Skip forward from March of 1989 to April the 20th of 2010, when the Deepwater Horizon rig that was located in the Gulf of Mexico had an explosion, spilling several million barrels of oil. The spill that I'm referring to is the Macondo well that broke loose, sending records amount of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. The significance of the spill is that it is the worst ecological disaster in U.S. history. It was created by man, and it is yet another reason why BP is falling short on safety and environmental issues. Tony Hayward was the chief executive officer in charge when the Deepwater Horizon incident happened, and Mother Nature wants the environment back, wants it returned to its natural state. And critics laughed when Hayward said he wanted his life back, because we in the United States, we want the environment back. In chapter 10 of our textbook, Business Ethics Now by Andrew Gilliar, we learned about doing what's right in a competitive market and sticking to it. At the end of the chapter, under Thinking Critically 10.2, there was a discussion called The Failed Transformation of BP. When I first read the title, I wondered what failed at BP. As far as I knew, the only thing that they had was that one incident in 2010. So I had to do some research, and what I learned was that in the early 1990s, BP, which is also known as British Petroleum, acquired some clean energy companies. They started a campaign called Beyond Petroleum. It invested in solar energy and invested in wind energy. It acquired companies like SolarX and Orion Energy, and they took a stand to produce clean energy, and they were a global leader at that time. BP's strategy was to take it to the next level in the competitive market, and they were going to do it by not having all their eggs in one basket. Prior to this move, BP had prided itself in being one of the major players in the petroleum crude industry. After purchasing alternative energy companies, they saw successful gains in the years 2000 to 2007. They recorded revenue gains 3 years in a row from 2004 to 2006, with an estimated $266 billion in revenue in 2006 alone. The brand awareness increased at BP from 4%, which was a meager amount, to a whopping 67%, and 21% of all consumers considered BP one of the greenest companies around. Still, critics argued and others scoffed and said that it was just a cover-up, that BP was only doing it because of the negative publicity and the outcry from safety violations that BP failed to take care of that resulted in ecological disasters. When you look at the track record of BP from the year 2000 to 2010, you see a decade of misfortune, bodily injury, and death to employees because of incidents that BP failed to take care of, and they all stemmed from crude oil and refined products facilities. In 2005, at the Texas City, Texas refinery, there was an explosion that killed 15 people and injured hundreds of others. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, otherwise known as OSHA, fined BP more than $21 million for failing to correct those safety violations. In 2006, near Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, there was an oil leak on a pipeline that resulted in an estimated 5,000 barrels of oil spilling onto the Alaska land. After 5 days, they had to shut in the oil well because they couldn't get the leak stopped. BP was forced to shut down this oil field, and they were forced again to pay fines. BP was fined by OSHA for an estimated $20 million for not taking care of corroding pipelines. Most critics would argue that BP was not off to a great start, and it did not present itself as a safety-minded company. In 2010, the same identical Texas City refinery had an emissions release, and when it was investigated by OSHA, British Petroleum took another hit in the pocketbook for an estimated $50.6 million, which was paid very quickly, hush-hush, without any admission of violations. On April the 20th, 2010, the largest spill in U.S. history happened off the coast of Louisiana, with an estimated 798 million barrels of oil spilled into the Gulf of Mexico. There were 760 safety violations found by OSHA in reference to this incident, and priceless lives were lost, a total of 11 that day. The pattern that developed here speaks for itself, and yet some would say it's just the cost of doing business. The pattern that developed mounted into evidence, and the evidence does speak for itself. It would appear that making a profit is more important than everyone going home at the end of the day and being safe. Paying a fine looks like it is just an acceptable practice at BP. In 2007, BP did take measures to try to make more changes to curb all the negative publicity. They put in charge a Tony Hayward. He was a former geologist who was over the exploration and oil production section of BP. Hayward promised to spend an estimated $500 million on improvements at the Texas City refinery, and he was also tasked with helping with criminal charges of another $370 million that BP was trying to get over. Hayward said that he would bring safety back to the forefront and the focus to everyone at BP, and that everyone would know that safety was top on their list. Others, still skeptical, knew that Hayward was brought up under the leadership of Lord John Brown, who was the former CEO, who pushed for profits, and paying fines was just the cost of doing business. After another episode at the Texas City refinery in 2010 and the Deepwater Horizon explosion and spill, it became obvious that BP had not changed. BP did not take proactive measures. Gillier, the author of our textbook, says that true ethical policies are proactive, not reactive, which occur when the company develops a clear sense of what it stands for as an ethical organization, not only what ethics mean to the company and its stakeholders, but also the extent of the actions it will take and the necessary punishments it will enforce to get there. Hayward was eventually replaced in 2010 with another CEO, and BP was stuck with a lot of unanswered questions. Former Chief Executive Officer Tony Hayward had made a statement during his tenure, stating that changing the culture of a 100,000 person company couldn't happen overnight. I think that the United States, the UK, and the world was expecting some tough changes out of British Petroleum. BP should have hired an ethics officer who could have been in charge of monitoring the ethical performance of the organization, both internally and externally. BP should have been transparent and worked towards organizational integrity. Organizational integrity is defined as a characteristic of publicly committing to the highest professional standards and sticking to that commitment. BP had a code of ethics, but it was only as strong as the people there. BP needed more training in code of ethics. They needed to choose between what was right and what was wrong. And we learned about that in chapter 1 of our textbook. BP employees need better ethics. BP needs sustainable ethics, and they need to stick to it. Thank you.